They called him the Little Father, Tsar Nicholas II, protector of the Russian people, God's appointed. On January 9, 1905, 150,000 workers marched to his palace to beg for help. They carried icons, sang hymns, held portraits of the Tsar. The Imperial Guard opened fire. 200 died in the snow. 800 fell wounded. The massacre lasted all day. This is the story of how Russia learned there was no Little Father, only Bloody Nicholas. St. Petersburg in 1905 was two cities. One gleamed, gold domes catching winter sun, wide boulevards lined with palaces. The Nevsky Prospect where nobles walked in furs. The Winter Palace where the Tsar should have been. The other city didn't gleam. Across the Narva on the Vyborg Side, in the workers' districts where smoke from the Putilov works hung permanent, where families lived 10 to a room, where the day started at 6 and ended at 6, 6 days a week, for 20 rubles a month. The population had doubled in 20 years, 2 million people. But the housing hadn't doubled, neither had the wages. St. Petersburg made artillery at Putilov, steel rails, locomotives, the machines that built an empire. 12,000 men worked those forges, breathed that smoke, went home to those rooms. Ivan Vasiliev was one of them, a metalworker, 28 years old. He'd come from Tver province 5 years before, left farming for factory work, for wages, for the future. He lived with 7 others in a basement apartment near the Narva Gate, worked 12-hour shifts casting iron, made 25 rubles a month, sent 5 home to his mother. December 1904. 4 workers at Putilov were fired, members of Father Gapon's assembly. The manager said it wasn't political. The workers knew better. Father Georgy Gapon was an Orthodox priest. He'd started the Assembly of Russian Factory Workers the year before. At first, it was sanctioned, even encouraged by the police, a safe place for workers to voice complaints without turning revolutionary. But by late 1904, Gapon's sympathies had shifted. He listened to the workers, really listened. 12-hour days, no safety measures, wages that couldn't feed a family, the foreman's arbitrary power, the manager's indifference. When the 4 workers were fired, Gapon called for their reinstatement. The manager refused. On January 3rd, the Putilov workers walked out, all 13,000 of them. Ivan Vasiliev joined the strike on day 2. He'd never struck before, never imagined he would. But the fired workers were men he knew, men like him, and if the company could fire them for joining the assembly, they could fire anyone. By January 7th, 140,000 workers across St. Petersburg were on strike. 382 factories. The city had no electricity, no newspapers. The streets felt different, quieter, waiting. The workers met at the assembly halls, discussed what to do next. Someone suggested a petition, a march to the Winter Palace, to present their grievances directly to the Tsar. The idea spread. The Tsar would help them. He had to. He was their little father. If he knew what they suffered, he would act. Ivan Vasiliev believed this. Most did. They drafted the petition together. Gapon wrote it in respectful terms. It began with loyalty, with faith, with the assumption that the Tsar wanted to help, but didn't know the truth. Sire, it read, we working men of St. Petersburg come to thee to seek justice and protection. We are impoverished. We are oppressed. We are overburdened with excessive toil. We are treated not as human beings. The demands were simple: an 8-hour workday, freedom to organize unions, fair wages, better conditions, free medical aid, and political reforms, a constituent assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of press. 135,000 workers signed it. Ivan Vasiliev signed on January 7th, put his name to paper, committed to marching. The plan was for Sunday, January 9th. Workers would gather at 6 points across the city. He risked march peacefully to the Winter Palace, present the petition, wait for the Tsar to respond. They would bring their families, women, children, the elderly, to show this wasn't rebellion, this was loyalty, desperation, hope. Ivan Vasiliev told his roommates he was going. They all agreed to march. From the Narva Gate assembly point, the closest to Putilov, where most of the factory workers would gather. The night before, he wrote a letter to his mother, told her he was marching, that things would get better, that the Tsar would listen. He didn't send it. Sunday morning, January 9th. Winter dawn came late. Ivan Vasiliev woke at 5, put on his best clothes, his only coat, wrapped a scarf against the cold. Outside, the streets were already full. Workers heading to assembly points, carrying icons, church banners, portraits of Nicholas II, singing "God Save the Tsar." At Narva Gate, the crowd grew. 10,000, 20, 30. Gapon himself was there, black robes against the snow, leading prayers, promising the Tsar would help. They started marching around 10, a slow procession, orderly, peaceful. Families in front, icons held high, the hymns echoing off the buildings. Ivan Vasiliev walked in the middle of the column, surrounded by men from Putilov, men he worked beside. They talked about what the Tsar might say, how quickly things might change, the 8-hour day, better pay, safety measures. Ahead, the street narrowed, the column pressed together. And then they saw them, soldiers blocking the road, rifles ready, an officer shouting orders to disperse. The crowd slowed but didn't stop. "They're bluffing," someone said. "They won't shoot unarmed people. We're loyal. We have the Tsar's portrait," the officer shouted again. The soldiers raised their rifles, and then the world became noise. Volleys, screaming, bodies falling, the snow turning red, people running, trampling each other. The soldiers reloading, firing again. Ivan Vasiliev felt something hit his shoulder, spun him around. The ground came up fast. He couldn't breathe. Around him, people were dying. The man who'd carried the icon, the woman who'd brought her daughter, the workers from Putilov who'd talked about better days. The shooting stopped, started again somewhere else. Cossacks on horses, sabers. The peaceful march had become a slaughter. Ivan Vasiliev didn't die that day. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, missed the bone. A factory worker pulled him into a courtyard, away from the shooting. A woman tied cloth around the wound. By evening, he was home, the basement apartment. His roommates, 2 of them hadn't come back. They waited. The men never returned. The official count was 130 dead, 800 wounded. Everyone knew it was more. Bodies in the streets, in the hospitals, carried home by families who didn't report them. 45 workers from Putilov died that day, 61 wounded. Men Ivan Vasiliev had known, worked beside, marched with. Father Gapon survived, escaped. later wrote that there was no God anymore, no Tsar, just the memory of volleys, of people falling, of prayers answered with bullets. The next day, 150,000 workers refused to work, not as a planned strike, as revulsion, as grief, as rage. Within weeks, 414,000 were striking across the empire. Moscow, Odessa, Warsaw. The revolution had started. Not with revolutionaries, with workers who'd believed in their Tsar. Ivan Vasiliev went back to Putilov after 2 weeks. His shoulder still hurt, would always hurt. But he needed the wages, needed to work. The factory felt different. The men talked differently. Not about appealing to authority, about taking it. The Social Democrats were organizing openly now. The Mensheviks, the Bolsheviks, talking about strikes. Soviets, revolution. In October, railway workers struck. The whole system. Petersburg ground to a halt. Workers formed a Soviet, a council to coordinate, to decide, to govern themselves. Tsar Nicholas issued the October Manifesto, promised a Duma, an elected assembly, constitutional monarchy. Some workers accepted it, most didn't. They'd seen what the Tsar's promises were worth, measured in bodies in the snow. By year's end, the regime crushed the Soviets, arrested the leaders, sent troops. The revolution failed. But something had broken. The centuries-old faith in the Tsar, the belief that the system could reform itself. Ivan Vasiliev stayed at Putilov, joined the underground workers' circles, quietly, carefully. He still had a scar on his shoulder, a reminder of January 9th, of the day he'd marched with icons and been answered with rifles. Walk through St. Petersburg today. The palaces are still there, the gold domes, the wide boulevards, the Winter Palace where Nicholas should have been that Sunday. The Putilov works became the Kirov factory, still stands, still makes machinery. The workers' districts are different now, but the memory remains. January 9th, 1905. Bloody Sunday, the day that destroyed the myth of the Little Father, the day the Russian Revolution truly began. 150,000 marched that day, carrying faith, carrying hope. 200 died, 800 fell wounded. Among them was a metalworker named Ivan Vasiliev, 28 years old, from Tver province, who'd come to Petersburg for wages and a future. He survived, lived to see the revolution of 1917, saw the Tsar fall, saw the Soviets take power, saw everything they'd marched for that Sunday finally happen, at a cost no one could have imagined. The Narva Gate still stands. Hear how. A memorial marks the site, lists the demands from the petition. 8-hour day, fair wages, freedom, simple things. Things worth marching for, worth dying for. Bloody Sunday proved something. You can't shoot faith. You can only prove it was misplaced. Russia learned that lesson, paid for it in blood, in revolution, in everything that followed. The gold domes remain. The bodies don't.